Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at astrological influences that can indicate you are somehow an outcast or a misfit or that you have experienced bullying, that you're more vulnerable to being singled out, scapegoated. The idea for this video came about because I'm recording this on Memorial Day, which is a national holiday in the United States, and it celebrates those men and women who were in service to this country, military service, who died doing that service. And there's a parade that happens every year. And because of the shutdown the last couple of years, they canceled the parade. And I promptly forgot all about it. And until I heard people outside and I realized they were walking to the main street to watch the parade. And so I decided to check it out. I've lived in this community for over 12 years, and I think I've seen it once. I don't have kids, and it's really a family-oriented type of thing. But as I was standing there, surrounded by members of my community, I thought about how much I felt like an outsider, even though I've lived here a dozen years. And it's not uncommon in today's world, at least in the United States, I would say, to live in a community and not know a lot of your neighbors. You could say, oh, that's too bad, or, that's not a good thing, but it is what it is. And I do know some of the neighbors on my block, but I don't know all of them. And I think that a lot of the people that connect in this community do so because they have kids and they meet up through their children, through school events and stuff like that. So when I was just standing there wearing a tie-dyed shirt, wearing a bandana for my hair, I noticed a few people looking at me, and it's not like an area that is like totally conservative or anything like that. But it just reminded me of how I've always felt like I'm on the outside looking in, and certain things in my chart that really indicate this. And I thought it would be interesting for some of you because I've had comments from people on some of my other videos. Like I've done videos on aspects from the sun to Uranus, which can indicate that kind of eccentric demeanor and how it, is received by other people. And people shared their experiences with me, and it was very healing to see that people are going through some of the same things that I have always experienced. And there are many indications of this, and certainly I'm not going to touch upon all of them, I am sure. I'm not even really prepared to do this. I'm talking off the top of my head. And I'm just going to go into different areas that I think could indicate some of these outcast type of, characteristics and experiences. In terms of signs, I think that Pisces, if you have a prominent Pisces, this could be one of the things that makes you like a scapegoat, especially where you get blamed for a lot of things. Why does that happen to a particular person? It can be that the person appears vulnerable, and when somebody appears vulnerable, they are, some of this is stuff that I think I have read and absorbed, and so it may not be ideas that I came up with originally, but something that I resonate with. I think that people who get picked on, a lot of times that sensitivity is tuned into, I believe, by the perpetrator. And because they don't have sensitivity and they see it in somebody else, it triggers them in some way. And I do believe that these bullies, that they were abused growing up. And so it reminds them of their own vulnerability when they were abused. And so they don't want to see it in somebody else. So they kind of become like the perpetrator in a sense. So being triggered makes them turn into the perpetrator. And Pisces is one of those signs that would do that in an outward kind of a way. There's always kind of this lost quality with Pisces. Well, I shouldn't say there's always. Oftentimes there can be this lost quality. And I'm not even saying that in an insulting way. I mean that the person doesn't feel like they belong where they are because they're tuned into they're on a different wavelength, and they're being forced to lower themselves to the lowest common denominator. And a lot of times that's very painful for somebody who is highly psychic, highly sensitive, because it feels very dark. Okay, so Pisces is arguably the most psychic sign, the most empathic sign, therefore. And so their feeling abilities are off the charts, and other people can pick up on that, and it can upset them in some way. And I don't think it's always something that they understand in a conscious way. They may just feel that sense of irritation or something about that person they reject. In terms of Pisces itself, I feel like there is a lot of that karmic baggage. Pisces is the last sign, and the 12th house that Pisces rules is all about karma. So that kind of stuff, the unfinished business that is carried over from other lifetimes, and which can self-perpetuate. And so the person it just keeps going on and on. And so what makes things even more challenging is that Pisces oftentimes will identify as the victim. That will become their identity. And they will feel, it's almost like that Christ complex, like they are meant to bear this great burden, but it becomes this kind of, I was going to say this mythology, but it's this thing that if they're not careful, they will not abandon that story at any point, and they will just keep creating more experiences or circumstances in their life which match up to that. And also, Pisces is a sign that is compassionate beyond measure, usually. Obviously, there are individuals who are not going to show that side. But the archetype for Pisces is kind of like this person who is totally forgiving. And so it allows a person who is hell-bent on being destructive to continue to do what they're doing. But also that person knows on a deep level that they are being forgiven. And because they don't love themselves, that can make them hate that person even more. It's a really weird thing, but you will see that if you are nice to a person who is mean to you, there might be some people that will be enough to turn them around and make them see their error in their ways. But if the person is really far gone, they will despise you for your kindness because their self-hatred is so great. It's like, how can you possibly love me? I'm such a bad person. And it's sad because they're very much trapped into that false narrative themselves. But you can get into some really weird dynamics if you allow yourself to try to penetrate that person's armor, if they are like that, because they can be very, very destructive, even if they're getting more and more love and light kind of poured into them. So that's one thing. And then I would say Pisces domain. So if you have personal planets especially, but even like Saturn in the 12th house, Pluto in the 12th house, this can point to somebody who is kind of singled out. So it could be in the family of origin where the person is chosen as a scapegoat. One of the things that, back in the day, I used to read a lot of books about adult children of alcoholics, and I am not the product of alcoholics, but I certainly have known multiple people who did grow up in an alcoholic environment. And these books are wonderful for anyone. I can't remember the names of the authors. There's more than one, but some of you probably know what I'm talking about. They came out with a series of them. And there's a thing about the family dynamics of a dysfunctional family, and somebody has to be the scapegoat. Somebody has to be the one that everybody blames for everything. And it doesn't have to be this formal thing where it's just a constant, well, I mean, it is kind of constant, but it's not that they're calling the person the scapegoat. They're just, things are being dumped on that person. And I do believe that it is the most sensitive person, because they're the ones, they said that the person who is the scapegoat, I think I read this, that the scapegoat is the one who sees through the bullshit of the family dynamics. And they are the only authentic one. And that really resonates with me, because I think that I can see how that would happen, where even from a young age, the one child who kind of just is stating these, dropping these truth bombs in the family, and everybody resents the hell out of it because they're phony, they're inauthentic, and they're out of touch with themselves. And this person is very self-aware and aware of the world around him or her. And that goes along with the intuitive person. They do not get misled by surfaces, by the way people present themselves. They can see behind the facade, and that's one of the key abilities of an authentic person. I mean, an intuitive person. So I think any of these planets in the 12th house, because the 12th house, again, that would be more of the karmic influence. If you have your sun in the 12th, I think that, I don't know if I'd say ironically, but the sun in the 12th might not be as traumatic. It simply can mean that the person prefers to express themselves from a very subtle perspective, not like in your face, because the sun can be like your creative self-expression, and the 12th house can be more of an interior kind of a place. So maybe that person has their own secret life that is very meaningful to them, but it's not something that they necessarily share with other people. They're alone a lot. I think what I'm talking about in terms of feeling shunned, kind of like not feeling understood, and that being excluded from things. The moon in the 12th might be more of that. And the person may feel like people don't understand them. And when people don't understand, and I'm talking about on the emotional level especially, and so when other people can't understand you, it's very hard for them to empathize. If they're like, why is this person, maybe when somebody is different, it can be very hard for other people to really have that same level of compassion because they don't see eye to eye with that person, or they don't think that that person is like everybody else. And of course, we know that that's not true, that everybody, there are some certain core things, attributes that make us human that are going to be true across the board, no matter what your background. So the moon, maybe, I think like the moon is a big one, but some of the outer planets, Uranus in the 12th house can mean that the person's afraid to be different, but that isn't necessarily about being bullied for being different. Pluto, yes, Pluto, and that can have a karmic edge to it as well. And Saturn, for sure. I think that those placements. And so I was touching upon house placement, and I'll talk about my placements in the 11th house, which is the house of friendships and groups. And so the collective is the 11th house. Now, group dynamics. Some people don't have any issue whatsoever walking into a situation where there's a group of people and fitting into that environment. Some of us are, almost break out into hives at the thought of it. We may not consider ourselves shy. We may not consider ourselves like completely antisocial, but we just don't like the group dynamic. We've had negative experiences with it. And I would say that is true for me. I always notice in group situations, like if I have been in some kind of like a classroom environment or some, even a spiritual group, this can emerge, where there are people who want to kind of, maybe they're charismatic, or maybe they're just very aggressive socially, and then other people form around that person, and it becomes like this cult or something like that. That's how it seems like to me. And then there are people who are very, who feel like kind of on the fringes, and that would be me. And we feel very awkward being in that environment because it doesn't seem democratic. It seems like there's this, you have to worship this person or these people. So I have Saturn and Chiron in the 11th. And so those of you who know what they represent, you can see why it would have been challenging for me to have that. And I have Saturn in Pisces. So that just adds to the fun and games of it. So what Saturn in the 11th house can represent is a person that has few friends. Saturn can be restrictive, and they tend to be older. The person will tend to have, maybe they don't see eye to eye with their peer group, and they prefer older people. Totally true for me. Even when I was young, I was precocious. I was connecting more with adults, like my teachers or things like that. And I didn't have that same sense of being plugged into my age group. And that just was even more so when I was a teenager. I just felt very different than the average teenager. But that didn't mean that I didn't have any friends. It was very few growing up. And so that can be very restrictive in terms of the type of social life that the person has. And I can't remember other things that they said about Saturn in the 11th house, although I would say, which is very good, that Saturn can represent something that matures. So it's like a treasury bond or something where if you give something enough time, you will get your wish if that's something that you want. And interestingly enough, the 11th house is the house of hopes and wishes. So if somebody really, has Saturn in the 11th and they really feel that sense of loneliness, they can find their tribe at a certain point in their life when they're older. I don't think that was really that big of a deal for me, just because of my own nature. I'm more introverted anyway. I'm not really somebody that is that desiring of a very active social life. So for other people that might be more problematic. But I also had Chiron here, and I think Chiron here did indicate the woundedness or the sensitivity in this area, because I really did feel, in a sense, rejected sometimes. And I know that I was different, so I just always have felt different. And I think that people who are maybe star seeds, or sometimes what I've heard is that people who identify as star seeds don't even feel like they belong here, like they took a wrong turn or something. I never felt like that, but I have felt like a fish out of water, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that this is par for the course if you are somebody who is intuitive, creative, that you just are not into what a lot of people are into. And so just by virtue of that alone, you may feel like you don't have a lot in common with other people. And so it can be hard to find that common ground as a result. So anyway, and I have Chiron and Pisces as well, and I'm pretty sure they're in conjunction. So in that 11th house, it was a lot of not feeling that sense of belonging. And so the bottom line is that we have to realize that to me, there is always a reason for everything that happens, that it's not just happening randomly, that it's too deeply ingrained of a pattern to be random. And so what do we do? Do we just accept that it's the will of the universe, but nothing else? I think we have to accept that this is something that has manifested in our life, but that we have the power through understanding what we have brought to this lifetime, maybe from past lifetimes, that we can consciously turn the ship in a different direction. And this might involve being very inclusive towards others ourselves, because I know in terms of me and my situation that what it did was it made me more aloof rather than friendlier. It made me more aloof because I wanted to give the impression that hey, I don't care anyway. I don't need to be a part of your group. But that's, in a sense, a bit of a defense mechanism, I think, on some level. And another thing that's interesting in terms of Saturn eventually giving you what you want in whatever house it's in is that when I got to be like, well, in the last however many years, 7 years or so, since I've started being on YouTube with my astrology readings, that it was very helpful in connecting with some of you online and just feeling that sense of camaraderie. And not just even with my channel, just doing it with other people. And, when I talk to other people online. So the internet is associated with the 11th house. And the sense of the collective, to me, can be just as strong, if not stronger, through the internet versus in real life in person. I used to be one of those people that totally dissed online connections that people had with each other. Or, if somebody said, oh, I belong to this internet group, I would think that was such a crock, and that the person really wasn't connecting with people deeply. And now I totally have changed my opinion on that. I almost think it's odd at how dismissive I was. Like, why did I think it was so inferior to being in real life? Well, I just thought that it was easy to pretend to be something you're not if you were online. And now I see that it really is legitimate. So that's my experience with the 11th house. The other house that I would look at is another house, I should say, is the third house. The third house can be elementary school years. If you have Pluto here, for instance, you might be bullied by teachers because they're in positions of authority. And the school setting is yet another setting with groups involved. And whenever there's group, there can be problems because the group mentality, or what's that? Isn't there a term, the mob rule or mob mentality? Is that how they say it? People, when they are with a group of other people, they may act differently than if they were one-on-one with you. So if there are people who look at you and think that you are strange or not like them, and it threatens them. If I look at somebody and they seem like totally different than me, I might be intrigued. I'm not going to be afraid, because a lot of times that fear is coming from, feeling like threatened by differences. Why would somebody be threatened by differences? Well, that's coming from a deficit within themselves, where people who don't follow the norm are suspect in some way. And to me, it's just kind of like the hive mind, where everybody thinks the same thing, does the same thing, makes the same choices, and then they can feel comfortable because there's strength in numbers. But the person who's the outlier, who kind of goes against the grain, that person will be treated with suspicion because they are different, but it can be because they're free thinkers. They're not lemmings. They're not sheep. They're willing to do things that other people are unwilling to do. And so there could even be secret envy that these people are so free of the opinions of others. And so in the third house, the school environment serves as a conditioning tool to make children into cooperative adults who will do what is asked of them. And maybe, I'm not saying that there are no good benefits to school, but the problem is that if you are different, you can be treated like you're some kind of like rebel without a cause, even though you're not consciously trying to rebel. Because I'm not talking about that sort of thing. I'm talking about attracting some sort of abuse or rejection, social rejection. And, where is the root cause? What is the root cause of it? And how can the person, transcend that so that they are operating at a higher level, but they're not operating like a victim. They're not identifying that way. So one of the markers would be Pluto in the third, and that could indicate having teachers that are very overbearing, not to pick on Catholic school, which is not public school, which is private school, but, the nuns with the rulers and that kind of thing. And then I think there might still be like religious schools. They might be some sort of Christian schools that have paddles. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that there still are paddles. I think they used to have them in the public schools even. And I'm, like I said, I'm from the United States. I don't know if this was across the country or just in regional areas, but so that Pluto could also be bullying from fellow students, that there's some kind of a, like pack that is the powerful ones. If you think about the bully of the school, they hold a lot of power, even though they may be really disliked and feared by other classmates. They still have that kind of power. And the third house represents those school years. Also, the third house represents siblings. So Pluto in the third could indicate some kind of bullying from siblings. And this brings up an important issue with sibling rivalry, which is really a strong component. I feel like a lot of narcissistic family systems operate with, sibling rivalry, really being the preferential treatment of the parent, the narcissistic parent, and the usual codependent co-parent. The other parent sometimes is enabling the narcissist, or maybe they're a narcissist too, or a covert narc. And they call the child that is favored the golden child. And so in sibling rivalry, I think a lot of that has to do with the child who is the scapegoat envying the golden child, or there being some kind of a bad blood between them because the parent has set this up. And the parent sets it up because they want to create this rift between the siblings so that the parent has more power. The parent becomes the person that the siblings want to please. And they're fighting, amongst themselves to please this narcissistic parent. So it's a really messed up situation. Also, I would say if Saturn is in the third house, it can manifest this way as well, where there is some kind of obstacle or limitation with a sibling that creates this kind of a rift there's a coldness, or, it's not austerity between the siblings. And that, again, is likely set up by the parent. So, let me think of what else I would say. In terms of like the first house, if you have Uranus in conjunction with the ascendant, or you have Aquarius rising, you may be just an eccentric type of person, even if you can't help yourself necessarily, because you really just feel that need to stand out, not in an egoic way, but just because the need to be original is such a strong force within yourself. And so sometimes the way that the person dresses can draw negative attention to themselves. It's really interesting. When I was a teenager, I remember when Boy George first came on the scene, and this was way before things happened with the transgender movement. I'm not saying that Boy George is somebody who's trans or anything like that, but just the whole idea of androgyny and things like that was not a big thing. There were some examples of it, even with somebody like Michael Jackson, but not really even Michael Jackson at that time yet was totally like that. And so when he came on the scene, people thought that he was a joke. And I remember watching, I think he was the first time he went on Johnny Carson. You can find that on YouTube. And some people that are listening to this don't even know who Johnny Carson is, probably. But anyway, he was treated like kind of a joke, and he had a pretty forceful way about himself in terms of how he spoke his mind. And I could tell that, he was not, it wasn't even being defensive. He was just like kind of stating, this is who I am. And other people saw him kind of like as a clown. And I'm not saying that everybody saw him that way. Everybody thought he was a big joke. But there were a number of people that did think that it was outlandish what he was wearing. And, there are examples even before that of, some of the most beloved, famous people at the time when they were starting out, they were not received that well. Elvis, I'm sure his hairstyle, the Beatles hairstyle, just physical appearance stuff was just picked apart by more conservative people because they dared to do something different. So somebody with Aquarius rising may be a lightning rod for that. And whether it's overall a positive or negative experience, it may vary if there are different things in the chart that support a more like a better reception. Because I was mentioning aspects, and I've done videos on the sun in conjunction with Uranus, and also the trine from the sun to Uranus, and how this can, or sextile too, that the person may be different, but other people accept those differences and don't seem to have too much of a problem with it. But it doesn't always work out that way. And so when people have squares from the sun to Uranus or oppositions, I have a square, the person somehow, it rubs people the wrong way, or there's just something that isn't quite as harmonious. And yet, some of those same qualities can be present even with the hard angles. Like the person may be very intelligent. The person may have a lot of charisma. And I think, I remember reading somewhere that when somebody is bullied, or in their family of origin, they're the scapegoat, they're being really the energy is being concentrated on them, is being given to them strongly. And I find that very interesting because I think that other people are recognizing that there's something special about you if you have if you have experienced a situation. And the trick is not to try to spend the rest of your life gaining that same level, that same intensity of attention heaped onto you. Because that's why I think sometimes people identify as a victim long past when they are actively being treated that way, is because it's very hard to all of a sudden you get to be an adult and all of those things that you dealt with as a child are no longer happening to you, and yet you're like, okay, now what? Because in a way you were given attention, more sometimes more than other people are given attention. And like I said earlier, maybe some of the people who are doing the bullying or other types of negative behaviors, mocking or excluding, maybe they are actually envious. Maybe they feel threatened by your presence. But whatever the reason, the point is that it was a negative form of attention. It wasn't something that was coming from a good place. Even if that person secretly admired you, it's not something that you want to replicate, that you want to encourage in your life. And so people have to be able to, be free to express themselves as they see fit without needing any kind of, acknowledgement by others at that sort of level. Because there are certain people that will dress and act outlandishly, and they are attention seeking. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people who attract other people's attention without meaning to, and it causing problems for them in some way. And even, being excluded in certain groups and things like that, that is significant because that person, took the time to do that. There was something about you that felt like a threat. There's something. Now, I'm not talking about if you're, behave badly, if you're rude, if you're, acting erratically. I'm talking about people who are nice, and yet they still find that they experience a lot of, either being ignored or actively omitted from social contacts, or blamed, or, something aggressive towards them. So, there are so many things I could talk about. I could talk about the fourth house and the family of origin, but this is not, if you have Mars in the fourth, maybe there's violence within the home. That is a little bit beyond the scope of this. I don't want to get into just straight up abuse. I'm talking specifically as it pertains to feeling like an outcast and feeling like other people don't get you. And ultimately, we don't need other people to get us. It's a challenge, but it's a worthy challenge to shine your light and be your authentic self and let the chips fall where they may. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's ultimately, I think, going to be the most rewarding, because then you're more likely to find your tribe. You'll find people who are like-minded when you are being your most authentic self. Okay, that's what I have for you. If you have any other observations, Chiron certainly, hard angles to Chiron can, and even friendly angles to Chiron might indicate some of these things as well. I talked about Chiron in the 11th, and even in the third Chiron, because the third house can be those elementary school years, as I stated. Alrighty then. If you'd like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.